Joining me now on this episode of Locally Sourced CP is newly found aviation pilot, El Paso and aviation pilot, Mr. Javier Joaquin Gomez. Sir, thank you for joining me today.
Hey, thanks for having me, Ray. Really appreciate the opportunity to come on here and speak with you.
No, I appreciate you coming on, man. I'll be first and foremost up front with everyone. I saw the post from FitFam
Hmm.
that you had graduated and become a pilot, and you were from El Paso. And then also the coolest thing that got me excited too was that not only were you from El Paso and you're a pilot, is that you're a local graduate here in El Paso, correct?
Yeah. I went to. I'm born and raised in the Northeast. Been there pretty much my whole life. So I went to Collins Elementary. It's no longer there anymore. They combined schools. Then went to
Mhm.
Terrace Hills, and then graduated from Andress High School.
Yeah.
There you go. And then from there, I went over to I went to EPCC as well as UTEP too. So the university here in El Paso, and was able to get a degree from both of those, my associates and my bachelor's, while I was also doing the flight training, of course. So.
That's so cool. Has becoming a pilot always been like a goal for you? Was it something you stumbled upon? I mean, was it something you always thought about you would do? How did that come about?
Yeah, so for me, it's been my dream ever since I was a kid. I mean, it started back when I was five. And I've always been interested. I mean, a lot of like young boys are like, oh, fighter jets, military aircraft. For me, I've always just been amazed by airliners. So from there, it just kind of stuck, and I always thought, hey, I'm always going to be an airline pilot. This is what I want to do, and just kind of went with it like that. As I started growing up, it's a really interesting industry to get into. And the reason being is there's not a lot of guidance on how to get into a career in aviation. So it's usually kind of like you kind of have to pick your way out of it and kind of just pick and choose, people that you talk to and kind of see what advice they can give you to guide you into this career. But yeah, so with that, it just kind of I ran with it, stuck with it since I was five. And everyone would ask me, what are you gonna do when you grow up? And I'm like, well, I'm gonna be an airline pilot, that's what I want to do. And being from there was where I graduated from high school, and I was like, well, now what do I do? So that's kind of where I've met a lot of people, and that where throughout this post that you were saying on FitFam, and they've reached out to me and said, hey, like how I'm 17 or I'm 18 or I want to, become a pilot. What's the first step? And that's pretty much the hardest thing to do when you're starting out, because there's really, like I said, no guidance that really pushes you in that direction of how to get there. So for me, I stayed local with most of my flight training. I did a lot of flight training here in El Paso, some flight training in Las Cruces, and I taught here. Oh, I still teach here in El Paso on the side, every now and then as a flight instructor. And then I also did a little bit of flight training and time building out in Las Vegas. But it was a long, hard road. But like you saw from the FitFam post, it paid off, and I kind of finally made it to a legacy carrier. Well, in my opinion, the best airline here in the U.S., one of the highestly rated domestic airlines and international airlines being Delta. So, I mean, it's been a good journey so far.
That's cool, man. I mean, it sounds like you put in a lot of work and worked real hard to get to where you're
Mhm.
at, and it's so cool that you're also like kind of like helping those, like you said, like from the post from FitPam, you have
Yeah.
people
Mhm.
asking, where do I get started, and then
Mhm.
you also decided to start your own little like instruction, like is it like an instruction class or just like a
Pretty
company
much.
or
Yeah,
training?
so we used to have access to a couple of airplanes that I was training people on. We partnered on a couple of planes, and then from there, a lot of guys, once they kind of get the career that they want, they kind of say, "Hey, I'm no longer going to instruct. I'm going to go, sell my airplane, and that's it. I'm just going to work as an airline pilot." The benefit with a lot of these airlines is they do give you that option to continue instructing, and that's something that I've really liked. Another little side gig that I've done is I worked as a substitute teacher, which I still do that for EPISD. So every now
Oh,
and then, some
nice.
students will see me around and they'll be like, "Hey, I think I've seen you before," and what do you do? Like, because they see I have like a pilot lanyard or something sticks out, and they'll make conversation with it. So that's for me, teaching has always kind of been another secondary passion for me. That's something that where I wanted to continue instructing from there. And for right now, what I do primarily is more of a client-based flight instruction business. So people will call me or word of mouth, it gets spread out, and they have an airplane and they say, "Hey, I just bought this airplane," or "Hey, I'm getting a new airplane," or what kind of airplane should I get? And then from there, once they get the airplane, I just start training them on it, get them at least their private license, commercial license, and then they go from there. The other thing I do obviously is going to be the ground school portion. So that's anything that's when we're learning, systems of the airplane, learning how to plan cross countries, or cross country flying, which is basically flying from one point to another, landing and then coming back.
Mhm.
So all that stuff is kind of inclusive on the ground training as well as the flight training. So when you do meet your instructor, most likely they're going to be saying, "Hey, this is what we're going to do. This is what I'm going to teach you on the ground. This is what I'm going to teach you in the air." And basically, that's how you'll go about getting your license on how to fly.
Wow, that's cool, man. That does sound like a lot of work though, but I mean, you gotta
Yeah.
you gotta make sure you're safe, you know what you're doing up
Yeah,
there in the
exactly.
cockpit and everything like that. And, in case of, you just gotta know what to do. Gotta know what to do.
Yeah, yeah.
I'd say it's not like driving a car, but I mean, you learn how to, you get experience driving the car, and you know what all the gauges and switches are. But I know it's more
Yeah.
complex
Mhm.
in a cockpit. But I mean, learning. I was gonna ask you, when you're learning how to fly, what are some of the hardest things to learn, or what's the most challenging for people to learn when you're trying to become a pilot or get your pilot's license?
I think one of the weirdest things coming, well, for me, I started a little differently. So I actually got my pilot's license before my driver's license. So I was flying planes before I was driving cars. So one of the things
Oh.
that I've noticed with my students that's kind of weird is when they come from driving a car into flying an airplane is when we're taxiing on the ground. So when you're kind of like driving on the ground in an airplane, they call it taxiing around. So if we're taxiing on the taxiway or taxiing to the runway. That's what we'd call as like our ground transportation way.
Mhm.
Um, a lot of the students that I meet, they're used to steering with their hands. So that's something, when they get in the airplane, they get on the controls and they're like, "Oh, well, how do you turn the airplane?" It's actually you're using your feet, to steer the airplane on the ground instead of using your hands. So something I always tell my students is saying like, "Hey, if it helps for anything, like put your hands down and steer with your feet until you get accustomed,
Mhm.
to steering around on the pavement with your feet instead of using your hands." So a lot of times I'll see students, they want to go left and they'll push the left rudder and then they'll also throw their hand in there and it's like, "Oh, just steer with your hand, just steer with your feet." So that's one thing starting out that kind of gets tricky for a lot of students is, it kind of throws them a curveball because they're not used to steering with their feet.
Right.
Um, Throughout the training, I would think a lot of it's a lot of memorization of procedure, and I think depending on the student, it could either be harder for some or easier for some. So for me, starting out young, it was a lot easier because I was able to kind of have like a fresh mind, and being that was like the flying airplanes was the first thing that I started doing in regards to like any kind of vehicle.
Mhm.
It made it easier to kind of remember the procedures and memorizing how to get into the maneuvers we were going to learn or what to keep in the back of my head as I'm performing this maneuver. So I think those are kind of challenging at first, but really it all boils down to the memorization of the procedures. So as you're demonstrating these procedures to your examiner that's going to be coming in and examining you from the FAA, that's probably going to be the hardest thing. They're looking for the procedure, making sure that you understand, how to get yourself into that maneuver, how to recover, and then how to get yourself out of it. And a lot of it's real procedural based. So once you kind of get that flow down, the flow of things, it really just makes everything a whole lot easier. But again, for some students it's easier, some students it's harder. It just
Right.
depends.
It's almost like a kind of like that memorization is kind of like you said, procedures is going through it,
Exactly. Yeah,
always knowing
everything.
what's next and,
Exactly.
and what you have to
Hmm.
do. Like I know,
Yeah.
like they always in the movies when the pilot gets in, they do a check, and that's kind of like they check all their instruments and everything like that.
Yeah,
Kind of
exactly.
kind of something like that, right?
Exactly. Yeah, same exact thing. So when you do get into like in these maneuvers, like for example, if we're doing like turns or climbs, one of the things we're keeping in mind is we're thinking in the back of our head, hey, when we get to this altitude, you're thinking ahead, what altitude should I start leveling off? About maybe 200-300 feet before I hit this altitude, and you're thinking, what's the procedure when I get there? Okay, I'll push down on the controls. I'll, reduce the power, and then I'll trim out the aircraft so that way it holds the altitude at that point. So again, it gets real
Nice.
procedural. And for the most part, like you said, it's pretty easy after you get the hang of it. It's a lot of repetition. So that's why again, some students, most of my students that I push through on their licenses, most of them it takes them by the time they get their license and certified by the FAA, usually takes anywhere from maybe 50 to 60 hours. But there are some students that, it requires a little bit more time. Sometimes, they're a little bit older in age, or maybe it's something that they're not fully, adapted to, or sometimes, they have a fear of flying even though they want to fly. So it takes them a little bit of time to kind of get over that. And
Right.
then again, based off of the student, that's really what makes that training a little bit customized. Mhm.
Nice. No, so I'll ask the question everyone's been asking on like the
Mhm.
fit on the fit fan posts, and
Uh-huh.
and I'm sure messaging the heck out of you.
Yeah.
What's the first step in if someone wanted to become a pilot,
Yeah.
either like privately, or maybe going as high as you have with
Mhm.
Delta and everything like that? What's the first step someone should take?
Well, the first step is really kind of getting familiar with what kind of schools are in your area and the way you want to go about it. There's a civilian route, there's the accelerated civilian route where you kind of go through an aeronautical university or an accelerated college. And then there's also, of course, the military route. If you're coming from a military background, let's say you've already been in the military, or let's say you have a degree and you can commission in the military, it makes it a lot easier. So I'll go through kind of like the quicker one. If you want to do something in the military, definitely they can help you out there. And then there are benefits to the military program as well, aside from like the life benefits that you get, and of course all those other things that come with it. The cool thing there is you can actually get a restricted airline transport pilot license with only 750 hours versus, for example, what normal civilians would need would be 1,500 hours.
Mhm.
Um, so the military route, basically, something that I looked into was actually doing the Air National Guard or the Air Force Reserve, which are kind of places that a lot of student pilots don't look at as they're kind of going through their training. If you have the degree, let's say you have a bachelor's degree in anything, you can actually go out and then just maybe get maybe your private license or even just try what they call Russia Squadron and go in and commission in the military, and they'll actually pay for your flight training.
Oh, nice.
And the good thing there is if you do something in the Guard or the Air Force Reserve, the good thing there is you're pretty much guaranteed a flying spot because they're hiring you exactly like they would hire a civilian to fly a specific airplane. They're going to train you for that specific airplane and you're pretty much guaranteed. Whereas if you go in active duty, the downside of that is, again, Uncle Sam may call you in a different direction, so you
Mhm.
may or may not. Yeah, they might tell you one month, hey, we're going to send you to UPT or undergraduate pilot training, and then all of a sudden, they need you somewhere else. So,
Yeah.
that kind of jeopardizes it. And then the other downside of it is if you go active duty, well, then you're full time, you're fully committed to the military at that point. Whereas if you do reserve or National Guard, you can kind of bounce around and say, hey, I'm going to have a job on the side, and then just do, whenever I get my orders from the military, I'll go, deploy or whatever they want me to do.
Nice. Dang,
Um,
that's
yeah,
crazy.
so that's one way to do it. I mean, it definitely will get you the license that you need, and of course, all the training that you need. So it definitely will expedite things a little bit fast too, as well, if you have that option. If you don't come in, let's say you don't have a degree or maybe you don't want to do the military,
Hmm.
the other two civilian options, there's going to an aeronautical university. So one of the main ones that a lot of people always say is Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University.
Hmm.
Nothing wrong with those schools. They're perfectly fine. They're going to get you everything that you need to basically go out and get a career in aviation, but that's pretty much the mindset of it. So if you go to these aeronautical universities, of course, you're getting a bachelor's degree out of it, but you're also getting like an accelerated course. And the downside of that is you really don't get to enjoy the flying as much because everything is kind of set up in the syllabus where it's just like do this, do this, do this, take the
Hmm.
exam, do this, do this, do this, take the exam. So you really don't get to enjoy it too much because it's more rushed and pressured on you.
Oh,
And there's
okay.
also accelerated schools, like I was mentioning, that are like ATP flight school, which a lot of people always ask me about too. And they're like, hey, well, I want to go to ATP. What do you think? Again, amazing, amazing way to get you to the flight deck of an airliner. Very, they'll get you everything that you need. But again, it's still based off of those programs where it's like, hey, we're gonna have a syllabus that's designed to get you from 0 hours to 1,500 hours and just keep rushing you and pushing you along. So it really isn't, I wouldn't say it's more self-paced. It's just more you just go with the program and you just keep going through exams. So I tend to, for me, I didn't do any of those routes. I had the opportunities to do, like I said, I looked into the Air Force Reserve, I looked into the aeronautical universities when I graduated from Andress. And for me, I just kind of thought, you know what, it's probably best for me to just stick, maybe local and kind of go at my own pace. And that
Hmm.
leads me to the last option that you could do civilian wise. So really what they're called is Part 61 schools. And what you do is they're basically like your mom and pop, your local flight school shops. And all you do is you go in there and you say, hey, I want to start flying. You pay as you go. The only bad thing with that is a lot of times as the student coming into those programs, the instructors have usually like a lot of students. So sometimes it's hard for them to kind of manage, in this case, like where you're at progress wise.
Yeah.
So you as the student kind of have to put in that extra work and say, hey, I need to know, I need to start looking into my airman certification standards, make sure I know what I'm going to get tested on, what I need to know, and make sure that if I don't know it, I ask my instructor or I tell them to teach me or I kind of keep up with that flow.
Oh, wow.
So that's the only bad thing with it. But overall, I'm a Part 61 guy. I started, here in El Paso at a school that was here at the airport. It was called Surratt Aviation. And that one, it just happened again, like for me, I didn't have a lot of information. I just saw the banner and it said, "Hey, learn how to fly." And I walked in and said, "Okay, like, hey, what do I do?" And the first thing that they're gonna probably do at the flight school is gonna say, "Hey, we're gonna put you on a discovery flight," which is basically when you hop in the airplane for about an hour and they just let you control it. They kind of show you the procedures, show you how it gets done. And it's more just to see, like, is it something that you're gonna enjoy? Because most of your time as you're building those 1,500 hours is going to be in a little single engine propeller plane, maybe a multi-engine propeller plane,
Mhm.
but a lot of it's going to be in that kind of setting. So that's why they're kind of seeing like, hey, is this something that you can, invest in? Is something you think you're going to like? Because in the long run, that's where you're going to spend most of your time,
Yeah.
flying and training in. So,
Oh,
and
that's
that's
crazy.
yeah, that's pretty much the way to go about it. So.
Yeah. So, what are some of your favorite planes that you've been able to fly in your career so far?
Hmm.
So far.
Well, there's been a lot.
Oh, wow.
I've flown from a bunch of Cessna airplanes. I've flown Cirrus airplanes, Piper airplanes. Been lucky enough to fly the Bombardier Learjets, and then of
Nice.
course the Airbus now. But for me, I think the most coolest plane that I've flown in I think my most favorite is gonna be the Learjet 60.
Hmm.
So it's basically a little private jet. It's like a twin. Actually, it's the flight deck right behind me. That's the
Oh,
little cockpit
nice.
out there. So yeah, that was a little memento from my previous employer that he was here based out of El Paso. They're called a ATI Jet.
Oh, that's
So they're a
cool.
charter company. But they do like private jet charters and all that stuff. But yeah, so that airplane, it's really, I would say it's like the fighter jet that of the civilian world because that airplane can climb, can turn. It's an amazing airplane. It can go all the way up to 51,000 feet if you wanted to,
Wow.
but that the climb rate that you'll get on those airplanes on a nice cold day, you're looking at somewhere between 8 to 9,000 feet a minute, and so everything happens in that plane very quickly. So
Oh,
you
man.
learn really quickly to start thinking ahead. So for something with me, when I went from the Learjet to the Airbus, I was kind of thinking the same thing. I was like, oh, this thing is gonna move quick, and it's very, very different. Coming from a private jet that was like a fighter jet, to a big old Airbus, it was like, oh, okay, well, now I actually have time, to sip my coffee and think what I'm gonna do next as I'm approaching the altitude, where the Learjet was like, you blink and you're already there,
Oh
So
man, that's
it's
crazy. That's
interesting, yeah.
crazy. Well, Javier, that's so cool. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your experience, not only with like some of the planes and stuff, and just the way
Uh-huh.
you've learned and the other ways that people can learn.
Yeah.
Hopefully this helps you out with everyone messaging you and stuff like
Oh
that.
yeah, for sure. Yeah,
And
definitely.
it's just been so cool. So you started your own little side gig and things like that. So are you taking on like I guess students and things like that still, or what's going
Yeah,
on with
so
that?
I still do train every now and then. I don't have access to the airplane that the airplanes that I used to have access to. So at this point, what I've been doing is again like it's more of like a client base. So I still do train. So I'll have some students that come to me, maybe word of mouth, or they're like, hey, you taught my neighbor or something, or you taught this guy how to fly, and I just got an airplane. Can you train me? Or hey, I'm looking at buying
Nice.
an airplane. Can you help me with getting certificated on it? Or it even could be already licensed pilots that are looking to do their biannual flight review and just say, hey, I need an instructor to jump in, my airplane or to get in an airplane with me to make sure I can renew my pilot's license for another
Cool.
2 years.
Oh
So yeah,
man.
I still do the instruction both in the air and on the ground. So of anything from like learning how to prepare for a written test, learning how to prepare for an oral exam that's going to be on your FAA check ride, anything like that, I could definitely help out with, and I'm always willing to help out with too. So I've actually seen people from different states in that time too, where I've met again through Instagram. People have gotten in contact with me. They've heard about me and they're like, hey, can you do a Zoom meeting with me and just go over like an oral exam with me for my
Cool.
private pilot check ride, make sure I'm ready. So I've helped out some people in California, I think up in Wisconsin and then over in Arizona. So kind of have a kind of stretching out my hands, trying to help anywhere that
Nice.
I can for
That's
sure.
cool. And if someone needed that,
Mhm.
what would be the best way to contact you? Like not giving out like your personal stuff. What would you suggest them get a hold of you if
I
you?
mean, the best thing for me, I mean, I mean, for sure, Instagram's always there. I mean, I do have like a business page. So if you were to go onto Google and search JJ Aviation, you'll actually pop up with my little, with my little Google business page up there
Sweet.
too. So that way you can always jump in there and say, hey, let me, and that, if you do call me from there, it'll go directly to me and I'll end up calling you back. If I'm in the air or doing something, eventually by the end of the day, it's usually like, hey, what's going on? Or even text too. I mean, people have texted me. They said, "Hey, I'm looking at this." So that's usually the best way. I mean, have that Google business page, Instagram, even my cell phone and all that. I'm always willing to help in that aspect.
No, awesome, man. I really appreciate it. And I'll tell you what, I'll if anyone's interested, I'll link your professional page and your Instagram in the
Well,
description
yeah,
below. That way
appreciate that.
people
Yeah,
get a
that'll
hold of you.
definitely help out.
And if they have any questions, they can hit you up. And
Yeah, for sure.
and Javier, man, I really appreciate you coming on.
Mhm.
Just especially being El Paso and also
Yeah, for
Andress
sure.
grad. It's so cool to see someone like you just killing it out there, man. I mean, like a lot of people like look at us in the Northeast, like, hey, you guys are from the Northeast, so it's like, what?
Yeah,
So what?
exactly.
And what we're as
Yeah.
successful as anybody else. So
Yep, exactly.
so cool, man. So I
We just enjoyed the scenery in the mountains.
Right. That's what
But
I mean, when I didn't move out because of that. Me and my wife stayed out here because of that. We're out here in the Northeast still, like over here
yeah,
around
it's a great area. Yeah.
Sandstone Ranch by the mountains, man.
Hmm.
It's I wouldn't leave it. I wouldn't want to leave.
Yeah. Now that we're speaking about the training, one of the other things that I get questions about is the financing
Oh
of the
yeah,
flight
that's another
training.
thing. Yeah.
So kind of going into that, if you do look at some of the options, I know, like I was talking about those accelerated schools or even those aeronautical universities being in that second option, those usually do offer financing.
Oh, cool.
Again, it goes through the school. They have, lenders that they've partnered up with, and they've kind of gone through it that way. Of course, there is also on the military route, if you're active duty and you're just active duty right now enlisted, you can actually use your GI Bill, depending on some of the schools, to actually help fund your training as well. On the civilian side, let's just say you're going to like a local mom and pop shop. Options that you have there, they're kind of limited. There's not too many options out there.
Mhm.
Um, because a lot of these schools, again, they don't partner with lenders and all, they don't have that big presence as all these bigger accelerated schools
Yeah.
have, made that footprint. So I think that's one of the things too that always kind of pushes, not pushes away students, but kind of, discourages them. But in the long run, I mean, it is a very, prosperous career. It definitely is going to have its payout
Yeah.
anywhere from now, from what I'm thinking. For me, in total, I think for all the training that I did up to where I actually finally had a flying job, I think it costed me anywhere from, I would say, 70 to maybe almost 80,000. So it is a little bit cheaper than becoming a doctor, but the
Yeah.
payout is definitely gonna be there, for
Yeah.
in the long run. Those jobs are gonna definitely need people there to do. So
Yeah, for
if you have
sure.
those options, I know, you can always, I would think the credit unions, banks are willing to give out loans, but it's gonna come with a hefty interest. But the good thing there is, I mean, there still is options, to make that dream, a possibility.
Yeah,
Just
I think anyone who's really interested in that, they're gonna do what they can, like
yeah,
you did. They're gonna do what they can to get
yeah,
it done.
exactly,
So
yeah.
I mean, it's just more like
Yeah.
it's almost like just going to that, like you said, it's just doing that extra bit in school, just
Yeah,
getting
it
it done.
really is. And for me, I mean, there was a point because I started out kind of like my timeline with it is I went to get my private license. So I got my private license pretty much when I had graduated high school. It took me about anywhere from 6 to 7 months right before I started college. And then when I went to college, I just stopped flying because I was like, hey, I just want to focus on getting through college. So from there, I went in after I graduated college. I still kind of put my dream on hold. I was like, hey, I got to find me a job that's going to help me to at least fund my flight training. So same exact thing, kind of looked for work, ended up catching a job with Southwest Airlines as a flight attendant. Did that for 5 years, but kind of like to give you the gist of it is like just taking that risk and not holding back. When COVID hit, Southwest Airlines didn't furlough. They actually gave us like a leave, like a leave of absence, that we were able to keep our benefits and stuff like that. So I went ahead and took that. So that was on my second year of employment with Southwest. So I took a year off, and with that year off that I had from Southwest, I actually went to knock out all my flight ratings that I could. So I got my instrument rating here in Santa Teresa from Red Arrow, then went to go time build and get my commercial single engine rating in Las Vegas, and then I came back to Las Cruces over at Frost Aviation and got my commercial multi-engine land, and then from there I got really, really lucky, kind of like I say, got drafted out of high school to go play in the NBA because I went from flying, Cessnas and a little twin engine Piper airplane to jumping in the right seat of a
Nice.
Learjet. And so it was a
Excuse
really,
me.
really good opportunity. I mean, I really lucked out, but I mean, those opportunities are there, so that's why a lot of kind of emphasizing, don't be afraid to take that risk because, I had a pretty decent, comfortable job with Southwest. I could have said, hey, you know what, I'm just going to settle here. And it wasn't until one day when I was looking at the flight deck and I said, you know what, I have my private pilot's license. I've worked up to this point. I might as well just, now that I'm getting this time off, just run with it. And I know it's going to be a big hit on the money, but I know in the long run it's going to pay off. And I mean,
Nice.
from what I'm seeing now, like, the depth that I've had has been able to being able to be paid off at this point and faster than I actually anticipated it. So it's
Mhm.
been really, really nice. Of course, living in El Paso definitely helps. I mean, the cost of living here is really
Yeah.
good. So, I mean, that's a benefit for the people in the El Paso area for sure.
Oh man,
But
you've killed it, man. You busted your butt and you got to where you're at, and that's so awesome, man. And again, I just
yeah,
congratulations on
I appreciate it.
everything
Yeah,
you've
thank you.
done, dude. And
Hmm.
again, I appreciate you coming on, talk about your experience coming to pilot, finishing it up,
Hmm.
flying some of the sweet rides that you have,
Yeah.
and again, I'll put all the information in the description below if everyone's interested in contacting you about any instruction or anything like that. And
Yeah. Mhm.
Javier, man, congratulations, man. It's so awesome. Thank you.
I appreciate that, Ray. I appreciate
Anything else
it.
you'd like to say or add before we end today, man?
Uh, Kind of just going back to it, man, for all the future pilots out there, don't give up. It's a long road. There's a lot of studying, a lot of money that's going to be invested in it. But I mean, I'm here to show you that, anyone can do it. I wear glasses, I'm a proud Latino, that's don't let, those things kind of hold you back. You'll see, you're going to encounter all these roadblocks along the way. There'll be points in your training where you don't know, where you're thinking you're not going to get it, or you're struggling because you're like, man, my check ride's tomorrow. And, I'm getting anxious and all this stuff, but just put it all in God's hands. If it's meant to be, it's meant to be, and take that risk. And once you jump in, just keep swimming. Don't let those waves push you down. And at the end of the day, once you get to that point, you'll look back and you'll say, okay, it was all worth it in the end. And with that, don't be afraid to lend a helping hand and help the next guy up. To sit up there in the flight deck with you at some point.
Nice, man. Nice, nice. Thanks. Wise words, sir. Wise and nice words. Mr. Javier, thank you for joining me. We'll see you in the air, sir. Thank you so
We'll
much.
see you, Ray. You take it easy.
Thank you too.